Rob Berthoff here, in a video that I think is just incredibly important to understand what's going on. October 8th, I posted a video where I empathized with Israel about their, albeit misguided, desire to bring about the return of the Messiah. A few months later, I posted a video where I talked about the dangers of the Zionist agenda and what I saw was coming. And now here we are 6 months in, and now this video is really an overview of and perspective of what's going on and why we need to be caring right now and why we need to be involved right now and letting our voices be heard. So the question is, how do we get here? And I recommend watching the previous two videos, but ultimately people think, oh, well, it's because October 7th. But no, this started a long time before that. This actually started back in 1991, if not before that, when Israel imposed closures. People were closed in. It's like being, putting a wall around somebody's neighborhood, right? And so this was naturally met with resistance. And there was two kind of major movements, the first Intifada and the second. And these were not just against the enclosure, but it was also against Israeli occupation in illegal settlements that was agreed would be Palestinian land. And so it showed from the beginning that there was this constant surge in illegal settlements, that Israel had no desire for a two-state solution. They wanted to own the entire area. And so this occupation made sure that it was very hard to have a two-state solution when you're now constantly aggravating the other party. And even when the United Nations Security Council ruled that Israel was in violation of international law, they didn't care. And so anyways, that's just a quick little recap. I didn't go very deep on that, but just to show this did not start with October 7th. And so what we need to understand is that they've been looking for an excuse. They've been looking for an excuse, ultimately, in order to start their ceremony. If you watch the second video, the first video, you'll know that they're looking to do this ritual sacrifice that they believe will return Christ. And they're looking for any excuse they can in order to then make this happen. And so when they knew this attack was coming, by the way, a year prior to the attack, and they did nothing about it because they wanted it to happen so that way they could respond, and that way they could do this, bring this about. They wanted to ethnically cleanse in God's name in order to bring back the coming Messiah. This is their newspaper, right? This is their words, right? So they would need an excuse. This was a perfect excuse if they let this event happen. Because ultimately what they're trying to do is they want to completely ethnically cleanse all of what is now Palestine. Again, so just a quick recap. This started long before October 7th. Israel knew of the plans to break through the walls, and in order to justify an ethnic cleansing, let it happen. So when we now see, how do we get involved in this? How did the U.S. get involved? And the U.S. was compelled to go based on a story that Hamas was decapitating babies, even with reports that they had babies in the oven. And this was even, Biden went on the air and said, I saw it with my own eyes. I can confirm the pictures, the beheadings of children. And yet he never actually saw them because there were no photos. It turned out to be a lie, that he kept repeating a false claim that Netanyahu told him. We actually even saw the interview where he said this. Netanyahu told him that this happened over a phone call. And then he keeps repeating this even though he never actually saw it. Why? Well, we'll find out why in a little bit. But ultimately, understand that Israel themselves never provided evidence, and even their official statement says they weren't going to confirm that babies were beheaded. So this ultimately, the same way that we got pulled in the Gulf War with lies of weapons of mass destruction, we got pulled in the Gaza War through lies about dead babies. It's just interesting that, the truth always comes out. It was 6 months until we, had all the details, but it's like every conspiracy theory after 6 months just becomes a conspiracy, it seems, at this point. So we also had this idea that there was tunnels, right? So the Times of Israel reported that there's tunnels under this major hospital, and that they were using these tunnels in order for Hamas. So the hospital was a cover for Hamas, and that gave Hamas permission, essentially, to go inside and raid it. Okay, but what's interesting is that the super sleuths on the internet actually found the real location, and the real location was a transmitter in Sweden. So it wasn't even, they just used fake images. And the one real image they used was actually a water reservoir for the hospital. And so they used this idea that there was false claims that Hamas was integrated into the hospital in order to be able to go into it. It turns out that that was just propaganda. And then when they went into the hospital, it was the World Health Organization described it as a death zone. It was absolutely they had just gone in and just slaughtered everyone. Okay. Well, we just found, this is just a couple days ago, 2 weeks ago, we found mass graves from that hospital. 380 bodies were discovered. This is like some partially decomposed. They're on top, right? This is doctors, it's patients, women, children. This was not soldiers. They were killing everyone in the place. And they've been systematically going through Gaza, systematically destroying all of the infrastructure. That way it can never be rebuilt and never be reutilized. But it's not an isolated incident. There was another 180 bodies discovered at another, at the Khan Yunis location, another hospital. So again, what we find is that there was ultimately 24, as of March 27th, 24 hospitals were targeted in a blanket attack on civilian infrastructure. And again, they use these excuses like, oh, well, we have to go in because there's just tunnels everywhere, right? And they use this idea also, this tunnel lie. They've used that, well, it's, there's actually tunnels underneath UN headquarters. And now they targeted UNRWA, right, because, using the same lie, because they wanted to stop any aid going in. And it's interesting that, ironic really, that the lie that they're telling about how, Hamas has command centers underneath everything, it turns out they have command centers underneath the civilian infrastructure in Tel Aviv, right? And by the way, talking about tunnels, I haven't forgotten about the secret tunnels that were in Brooklyn. They were digging tunnels in New York City. I mean, it's just really ironic that they speak to that. But the sad thing is, again, what becomes clear, they were using lies in order to say that that the Relief and Works Agency UNRWA needed to be dismantled, had the funding cut, all these horrible things. This stuff is going to come out eventually. You're going to see all this. I'm trying to help you guys see it now, so that way you don't come out the other end of this and end up being complicit or just ignorant of the whole thing. It's just sad. And so ultimately, right now, Israel does not want to allow any aid to get to the people. And so they're using excuses to stop UNRWA food convoys, right? They're using excuses. In fact, it's called, this campaign was described as an insidious campaign by Israel to stop any relief to Gaza. That's what the United Nations has said. And more than just stopping aid, they're literally now targeting aid workers. Recently, Israel used precision airstrikes to target aid workers. They ultimately killed multiple. And these were the World Kitchen. This was direct targeting. They knew there was signs all over the vehicle. They knew who it was. They've even admitted that it was a mistake. And they killed 7 non-Palestinians. These were one was from America, right, etc. And they're targeting this. So the question is how can they get away with this level of murder? Just absolute atrocities. And by the way, I'm not even going to get into just how disgusting what they're doing there was. The war crimes that they're doing there are insane. I'm just keeping this light as I can at this point because it's just too dark to even go there. But just know there's a lot more. The question is why there's no consequences. And the answer is simple. It's because of money. It's no secret that the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, is pumping a ridiculous amount of money into the U.S. system. In fact, the pro-Israel lobby got caught on tape boasting that it owns all of Washington. Right? Netanyahu actually had an interview years ago where he said the same thing. And Congress members, I think it's been revealed that Congress members, the ones that are the most pro-Israel right now, all got at least $100,000 or more from donors, from pro-Israel donors. And so AIPAC is just pumping money into this in order to buy seats in Congress. And we're talking all the way to the top. Joe Biden has received $5.7 million in donations. Hillary Clinton, $2.3 million in donations. Right? We see that Israel lobby has given $58 million, and that's just recently, $58 million to Congress. Okay, and that's why they're backing it so much. Also, can I just say, this is a complete tangent, but I get that this whole star thing here, like, I don't know, it just looks too much like anyways. The point is, money is being poured into these people. Pro-Israel groups are still planning to pour even more money into U.S. elections. I think it's interesting also, it's not just the politicians, it's also the media. The media themselves are complicit in this. Most of them, it seems, have the same agenda. Right now, this is kind of a little, I think some of this stuff is overconflated, right? But it's not just, it's across the board. But understand this, you would expect that there would be a number of Jews in each corporation, because there's 2.4% of Americans are Jews, but this level of saturation speaks further than that. Now, if you say that, right, the person who created this little graphic here, the Israeli newspaper came out and called him an anti-Semite, and said that by him just kind of pointing out the obvious and putting, identifying all the people who were Jewish in each of these news organizations, it was considered anti-Semitic, right? And that's what he was called. But it's interesting though; it just feels like that term is thrown around a lot for just about anything. It's called the weaponization of anti-Semitism. And this tactic is traced back to 1943, where for political purposes, any criticism of Israel is branded as anti-Semitism. This is saying the same thing by Noam Chomsky in his book in 1983, The Fateful Triangle. He writes, the post-1967 period, that tactic has been honed to a high art, increasingly so, as the policies become less and less defensible. So the worse and worse that they do things, the higher and higher they form this rhetoric. And what we end up seeing is that anti-Zionism, is now in the U.S. House, right? And it's actually been voted on. H.R. 894 now says, this is brand new stuff, by the way, says anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Even the slogan "from the river to the sea" is now considered hate speech based on this resolution. So it just feels like anything, this idea of like everything is now anti-Semitism. But the irony is, if you were to get to what does actually anti-Semite mean? It means anyone that speaks against a Semitic language. So that's Arabic, Aramaic, Hebrew, right? It's not just, you can't just say that this is just for Jews. But the word Zionist was actually almost considered being banned from Meta. So Meta, it turns out that they were going to ban the word Zionist from their platform. And it just keeps coming down to this idea of suppression. And we keep looking to social media platforms. Israel made requests to Meta and TikTok to remove 8,000 posts, and 94% of those were removed. But it's like anything that is critical of an ongoing genocide is going to be scrubbed off the internet. On Saturday, the Senate came in. This is just 2 days ago, whatever it was, 3 days ago. The Senate came in for a special vote to pass more aid to Israel. Interestingly enough, coinciding with the birth date of Hitler, a little homage to genocide. But in that same bill, they bundled in a ban for forced sale of TikTok. And so you'd have to ask why. Why do they want to ban TikTok? And they say, oh, it's because of Chinese. No, it has nothing to do with the Chinese. Right? The data centers are here, or in the U.S. The reason they hate TikTok so much is because it has allowed for a place to share this growing outrage of what's happening. And so they're saying, well, it's all pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel sentiment. No, it's pro-humanitarian, right? I think the idea is that if you were to go back, this has nothing to, and put things in context, you'll find it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism or pro-Palestine. It's about free speech. And it's about calling out genocide by its name, right? If the app existed in Nazi Germany when, Germany was committing genocide against Israel, right? The tables were turned, then they would love the app, right? But it leads the question then, why is Facebook and Instagram, why is Meta not targeted in any of this, right? Why does Meta get a free pass? And the reason is because Meta is part of the suppression. The Human Rights Watch identified over 1,000 takedowns of content related to Israel human rights abuses, as well as content from users from 60 countries that showed support of Palestine got taken down. And now what's interesting is, if you go into the history of this, Meta's chief information security officer, Guy Rosen, is full on, I believe he was ex-Mossad. I don't know what he was, IDF for sure. But he actually came. He was part of an acquisition in. And so, Facebook's, we read here, Facebook's VP of Integrity, Guy Rosen, who co-founded Anavo, which was a software company that Facebook acquired back in 2013. And it was really a VPN service that monitored the activity of its competitors, right? So it's interesting how that tech was acquired. And even we find out that Meta was planning to clone Snapchat based on the tech that Guy Rosen brought in. And so what we're seeing here is that throughout the Meta platform, including WhatsApp, has been utilized to help with, ultimately sharing data, right? And so we see Meta has been culpable of Israel's killings of tens of thousands of Palestinians. They keep using sharing information that's found in WhatsApp groups, and also used to train AI. So they're using Meta's data. That's kind of metadata, but they're using Meta's data sets in order to train AI, in order to then be able to then target Palestinians. The program's called Lavender, and it's ultimately AI technology that allows them to better identify targets. We find here in The Guardian, they write that the machine has identified 37 Hamas targets already, and that they're using this system, which they've given permission to kill civilians even. And so it's just a blanket script of just kill it all, kill everyone, it seems. And Google got it's not just Meta. Google also got a $1.2 billion contract for advanced AI for image categorization. They call it Blue Wolf for collecting images, and then Red Wolf, which was their facial recognition. They also have object tracking tools, and this is all under this project called Nimbus. And right now, Google just literally last month, there was a big group of Google Cloud engineers that did not want to participate in genocide, and they all got fired. And so ultimately what we can start seeing here is that, again, this is not looking for surgical strikes. They're looking for complete annihilation. A Jewish rabbi, Mali, calls out to kill all Gazans, women and children. Do not spare any soul, he says. They want to win at all cost. It's insane, though, being alive during a genocide. And I know, like, we've had these before. It's not been, the last one was not, was not Nazi Germany. Like, we've had human rights atrocities, but it's just interesting just seeing it so clearly through the age of social media. It's this mindset of theirs, which is like, they don't want to stop. They're just going to kill anything and everything, and that includes their own people. They've killed already 200 of their own citizens and hostages. And this plays into this directive of theirs called the Hannibal Directive, which essentially says that we do not want people to be kidnapped, and we would rather kill them ourselves than have to use them as bargaining chips. And we see the pressure that they're under in order to get their all the hostages back, but they have no desire to do hostages. In fact, what we find out is that when the hostages are coming out, they're actually killing them, whether it's on purpose or not. We actually find out that there's been many hostages, Israeli hostages, killed by their own people. In fact, there's a story how hostages were shot by their own IDF, shot their own people, even after putting out an SOS sign. And even see how they were coming out with. There was a couple of hostages recently had come out white flag, and they were even wanting to be rescued, and they were killed by their own people. It's just crazy. This is not about getting hostages back. This is about complete annihilation. And what we see here is that they're losing the war. In fact, from their own news sources saying what can't be said, Israel has been defeated, a total defeat, right? It's absolutely crazy seeing this, right? Also, we have another one here from The Guardian. Israel is losing the war against Hamas, but Netanyahu and his government will never admit it. And this is where it gets scary, is that Netanyahu, if he If this ends, the War Council will disband, his government will be disbanded, and he will go to jail. He does not want this. He wants to keep this going. He's even said that Israel will defeat Hamas even if U.S. turns her back on us. And this was actually from the Strategic Affairs Minister, Ron Dermer, who said this in a podcast. And it's just really interesting how, they don't care if the entire world opposes them or not, right? They are going to complete this mission. And, this is the reason, if you're wondering, well, why did Israel launch a strike against, a consulate in Syria? Like, that makes no sense. Well, it does if you're trying to poke a bear, right? Israel needs to, get the eyes off of what they're doing in Rafah. They just killed a bunch of aid workers, and they needed to do something to get people away from that. So they're not seeing that anymore. They need to distract them. And so now they're going to put us all in this battle with Iran. Luckily, Iran has a cooler head, and they made just a gesture of a retaliation, right? They even warned Israel. They even told Israel, "Hey, we're sending a bunch of these very slow-moving, drones, And the U.S. then scrambled. It was $1 billion operation. The U.S. helped knock all of them down. But the point is that it's just it just feels very reminiscent of this idea of how, we're being pulled unprovoked into conflicts. It feels like Israel is this little brat of a child who is going to do whatever it takes to get their way. And again, it reminds me of going back a couple years, 50 years, about the attack that Israel did on USS Liberty. And if we get into that, what we'll see is that Israel actually attacked one of our boats, one of our ships, and wanting to, what we understand, off the coast of Egypt. What we understand is that it was likely that they wanted to pull us into war with Egypt and wanted to back them. And they wanted to then pretend that it was Egypt that killed the boat. There's a few other reasons for this. Ultimately, what we see here is that Israel cannot be trusted. We've got to be very careful what's going on here. We are being pulled into war with them, by them. And this is why the students are standing up. This is why nearly 200 Harvard students just did a protest. Right? This is interesting how outraged, right, universities are at protesting all of this. Right? Universities are so up in arms about what's going on, but they didn't seem to care when it was the other way around. Right? It's interesting how little attention was given to the chemical attack by back in January. There was a chemical attack by former IDF soldiers who attacked protesters. No arrests were made. None. So how is it that no arrests were made, and yet Yale students, as of earlier today, Yale students are being arrested on campus for protests. And yet when IDF students, right, are spraying students, no arrests are made. It's just so interesting. Columbia, as of today, has actually suspended in-person classes, right? They are just trying to stop these protests from happening, right? But it just feels, again, very reminiscent. It just feels like, feels very reminiscent to the Kent State shootings, right? This idea of, we're not too far actually from the, March 4th, May 4th, would be the anniversary of when the National Guard killed 4 students for protesting another illegal war. Let's hope it doesn't repeat itself. But again, we have to understand that whether it's from the Vietnam protests, which were fueled by opposition to what was perceived as an unnecessary and unjust war, right? This deeply resonated with the youth of their time. Some of them actually were also being drafted. They didn't want that, so it hit home even more than it is now. But similarly, these protests in Gaza are uprooted by an opposition to violence, right? Calling for the respect of Palestinian rights. So whether it's from teach-ins back in the Vietnam days to TikToks, students are always uniting for peace. And I think what's important is that we've got to look back to the past to make sure we don't repeat it. Let's not be on the wrong side of the Vietnam War. Let's not be on the wrong side, ultimately, of the Nazi Party. It begs the question: when it's all said and done, what's going to be our legacy? When history was written, which side will you be on? Will we have taken a stand against evil, or will we have also been complicit with a genocide like Nazi Germany was? And to me, it just blew my mind back in the day. Like, I always wondered, how could, all Germans must be evil, right? Because how could they allow a genocide to happen? And now I'm watching it, and I'm watching how people are just so indifferent. People just don't seem to care. In fact, it's just so bizarre to me watching the similarities of then charismatic leaders and now, right? AIPAC is the new Nazi Germany. Well, not AIPAC, but Zionist movement is the new Nazi Germany. There's no difference. There's no difference from what the movement of ethnic cleansing was in Germany to the movement of ethnic cleansing right now. It's absolutely disgusting when we have to just look at things as they are and understand that genocide is genocide. History will ask if we stood against evil or stood by it, and silence is complicity.